Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the MIT Sloan Experts Series. I'm your host, Rebecca Knight. Today we're talking to Andy McAfee and Erik Brynjolfsson. They are the authors of a new book, Machine, Platform, Crowd, Harnessing Our Digital Future. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, Rebecca.
And for clarity, he's Erik, I'm Andy.
Before we begin, I want to remind our viewers that we'll be taking questions from you on social media during the second half of our program. Please use the hashtag MIT Sloan Experts on Twitter to pose your questions. Let's get started. So, Erik, Andy, your last book, The Second Machine Age, was about how digital technology is transforming our work and our lives. Is this one a follow-up to that? Is it a sequel? How would you describe it?
I wouldn't call it a sequel, but it's very much inspired by a lot of the same big forces. We think we're in the early stages of a real revolution that's happening in our economy, driven by digital technologies. And part of that is the way it's affecting the macroeconomy, but another aspect of it is how it's affecting businesses and organizations. You see this chaos out there of big companies collapsing, other new ones seemingly coming out of nowhere, and it seems like there's no rhyme or reason to it, but it turns out that there are some underlying principles behind these big changes. And we both work at a business school, so we thought we could convey some of those principles to a broader audience.
And so what are the underlying principles? What are these trends that you're seeing?
Well, the single big idea in the book is that technology rewrites the business playbook. And if you continue to rely on a previous version of the business playbook when technology has shifted things, you're actually in a lot of trouble. And we think the way that technology is rewriting the business playbook now is that it's shifting the balance very quickly and deeply between minds and machines, between a product-oriented view of the world and a platform-oriented view of the world, and between reliance on the core capability, the core competence, the core process of an organization, and the crowd, by which we literally mean these hundreds of millions of random weirdos available out there over the internet these days.
So this is what companies and individuals need to do to harness our digital future, rethink the integration of minds and machines, products and platforms, the crowd and the core. This sounds like a pretty tall order. How big a shift is this?
It is a tall order, and the good news is the technologists have done an amazing job giving us some tools that we never had before. We can now connect literally many billions of people and brains across the globe, and we have tools for reaching customers more effectively. We have tools for making better decisions. But the part that's lagging is updating our business models, our organizations, our business processes. And it's always been that way. Every big technology has had these sometimes decade-long lags between the potential and realizing that potential. We're trying to shorten that by describing some of the ways companies can be more effective.
Okay, so let's talk about the first idea, minds and machines. In the last few years, we've seen huge advances in machine learning and a surge in activity. What's driving it?
What's driving it is that for the very first time, we have been able to build machines that are not limited by our own knowledge. The reason we call programming coding is that in the old days, we would encode our knowledge in a piece of software and then let that software go do its thing. We still do that. It's still a really valuable thing to do. In addition, though, we are now able to build these machine learning systems where, to oversimplify a huge amount, you just show it a huge number of examples of what you're interested in, and the systems we have today can essentially go, yeah, okay, I got it from here. We haven't encoded our knowledge into that. We've built systems that can develop knowledge on their own.
So you talk about this, how we've operated with this standard partnership where machines have been doing sort of the boring, monotonous, repetitive tasks, and the humans have done the higher order thinking that concerns judgment and intuition. But that standard partnership in itself is flawed.
It is. It's changing quite dramatically, and that's because machines can now take on more and more of those decision-making capabilities in two big ways. A, they're acting as decision aids. The concept of data-driven decision-making is sweeping through America and through the world. We did one study where we found that the number of companies that qualified as data-driven decision-makers by our standards had tripled over a 5-year period. The other big thing is what Andy was just touching on, is the rise of artificial intelligence, specifically this idea of machine learning. And in many cases, the machines can make decisions not just as an aid to humans, but even better than humans.
And we really tend to overvalue how good we are at making these decisions. And you talk about in the book about that. Can you go on a little bit?
I want Erik to talk about one of my favorite studies of his, where he looked at a really important decision for our kinds of organizations, which are universities, and looking at who gets tenure and who doesn't.
Sure. That's a perfect example. Everyone's heard about the Moneyball example that brought 3 World Series to the Red Sox, and the Golden State Warriors have been using some of those techniques. Finally, we're beginning to apply some of them to our own industry, which is figuring out who the young rising stars are and what we
in academia.
In academia, exactly, at universities and business schools. So working with Dimitri Bert-Seamus, who's an operations researcher here, and 2 students, John Silberholtz and Shahar Reichman, we analyzed the records of a bunch of young scholars, and we were able to predict which ones were going to, years later, get tenure at top universities. We were right about 70% of the time, which was pretty good. But I think the more interesting thing is those 30% where we were wrong, we continued to trace those people, and what we found was that our algorithm did a better job than the human tenure committees at figuring out who was going to continue to have a good publishing career. So I think we need to take a page from Moneyball and from data-driven decision-making and learn how to use analytics in our own industry.
But algorithms aren't perfect either. In the book, you describe how they can behave badly.
Yeah, what's interesting is that algorithms have a failure mode, and that failure mode is kind of not being able to see the bigger picture. They're in a box inside a computer. We humans have very different failure modes than algorithms do. We are really inconsistent, we're biased, we're glitchy. What Erik and I think is the great opportunity going forward is not trying to eliminate the minds, but trying to figure out how to bring minds and machines together, not so that we double down on the errors that we're already making, but so that we can drive the errors out of each of these 2 entities and arrive at an overall better solution.
And if I can just interject, this is an important principle for all 3 categories. We talk about machines, platforms, and crowds as opposed to minds, products, and the core, but in each case, there's a rebalancing going on. The machines, platforms, and crowds are becoming more powerful, but it doesn't mean turn the dial all the way to the extreme. You have to find the right balance.
One of the other big trends you talk about in the book is virtualization, and you give an example of Pizza, which is a very cool, hip eatery based in San Francisco, now all over the country. How is it using this technology?
Well, Andy, you were there.
Yeah, so I had lunch at Pizza a while back, and I had a delicious quinoa bowl, which I felt very virtuous about.
Yes.
And it actually tasted good. For me, the real thrill of the restaurant, though, was that I didn't interact with a single human being, an Pizza employee, at any point during the meal. So I walked in, and there were a bunch of kiosks with a really good design on it, so I could figure out what they wanted me to do. I swiped a credit card. I did my order for the quinoa bowl, and then I was watching this leaderboard of names. I got the name off my credit card, rise up, and then when my name got to the top, this translucent cubbyhole lit up with my name on it and a little Target sign. And I went over and I hit the Target sign, because after all, it was a Target. The lid from the cubbyhole opened up, and you could hear the choir of angels, and there was my food right there. And then I went down, and I want to be clear, I did talk to another human being, the person I was having lunch with. I just didn't talk to an Pizza employee. Now, I love that experience because I found it very, very efficient. There was no interaction or no transaction that felt weird to me, and I wound up getting not only a yummy quinoa bowl, but having lunch with my friend more quickly than I would have otherwise.
But does everyone want this? I mean, that's the thing.
Definitely not. You know, it's funny. Andy and I were having dinner with each other last week, and there was an executive from a major tech company. I won't say who, but he's a little bit more like Andy. When he orders,
this is a great story. This is a true story.
He will write down on an index card his order and give it to the waiter, because he's determined, and he's a real nut about statistics, that 3% of the time they get the order wrong if he doesn't write it down.
Okay.
I think he probably has the stats to back that.
All right, okay.
And he wants it to be 100% accurate, so he gives them the card. And we asked just the same question. He's like, don't you enjoy interacting?
Right.
And he said no.
Okay.
He said he was there to talk to the other people at dinner. But I'm totally with you. I was talking to the restaurant owner of another big restaurant. I guess I probably shouldn't say his name. And they tried a more automated approach. It's kind of a higher end restaurant. And they actually had to back off because so many of their customers felt like not having any interaction with the human waitstaff made it seem like less of a high-end experience. I have to kind of agree. I think if I'm going for a quick meal at a place like Itza, yeah, you just want it quick. But if you're going to a fine dining restaurant, part of the whole experience, the whole show, is having the waiter describe all the meals and so forth.
Now, what I think is interesting about that is in the section of the book where we talk about virtualization, that's in the machine part of the book, there's another phenomenon that goes hand in hand with it that gets exactly to what Erik was talking about, which is self-selection. And some of us are going to choose to have more virtualized, fewer humans in the loop experiences. Some of us are going to choose to have more humans in the loop. What I find so interesting is up until now, we didn't really have that choice very often because we had to have people in the loop because of the state of technology. Now we have an alternative. And as similar as Erik and I are in a lot of ways, even when I go to a good restaurant, I don't want to listen to the specials and talk to the lawyer. Freudian slip. Talk to the server. What I want to do instead, I hope that a really good restaurant of the future has a section for people like Erik who want to go walk through the specials, and then another section with tablets on it so I can talk to my dinner companions and have the food kind of magically show up.
Or different restaurants. This is we're big fans of the marketplace, and these things will sort themselves out.
That's right. And it's important to keep that in mind. People think that we have to swing one way or the other with all of our interactions. I don't think that's the case at all. Innovators and entrepreneurs are going to say, look, for this segment that wants virtualization, we're going to do that. For people who actually value the human touch here, we're going to do this.
And don't listen to Andy about which is the right solution, and don't listen to me. Neither of those is the right way to make the decision.
That's right.
The right way is to experiment and test, and that's a theme we come back to over and over, is that no human expert is going to be as good as the crowd or as doing real-time experiments, something we can do a lot more easily now.
This is important. Listening to the two of us about exactly what's going to happen in the future and the big trends has some value. It ain't going to get you all the way there. Try something, start something, experiment.
And listen to a whole bunch of other people too. Other experts.
Find a way to fail fast, to test different things. That's how successful companies work. They sense and respond. It's not by sitting in a room and figuring out their next 5-year plan.
So that restaurant experiment that Erik talked about where they had tablets for a while and took them out, great. I hope that wasn't too expensive an experiment, but for them, they learned something from that.
Well, the MIT Sloan Experts Series recently sat down with Sandy Pentland, who is the director of the MIT Media Lab, to talk about this and other topics. Here's what he had to say.
Management has always been something that's really industrial age. You know, you have layers of management and fixed teams that are reassigned every once in a great while. So it's very much like a factory where this is where we're widgets and this is where we put the widgets together and that works sort of okay, but it's not like the human race grew up, which was very dynamic and we would have different things to do all the time. And now that transaction costs are low, so it's now easy to exchange information, to involve people, to get things organized differently. You don't have to be so static about how you organize things. You can have different ways to do it that are far more adaptable to the circumstance. And that's, I think, the thing to notice is that the way that org chart was set up is really good for 1890, and it's not good for 2020. We can do a much better job, and when we do it, we see the productivity immediately. Well, the thing that is striking in our research is that we find that the jobs that are paid the best and are in most demand are the connector jobs. They're the ones that connect people in different situations to exploit opportunities. So it's the intrapreneur, the entrepreneur, in some sense, a really good sales guy who's looking for things that are really demanded by the customer, not shoving it on them. And those in the national data are growing like wildfire and paid much better than anything. And those are not things that are easy to automate at all because they're about my relationship with you and my relationship with you, and it's your unstated desire and his unstated ability that I have to somehow perceive. So it's a very human-centric, very human insight type of a thing, and it's incredibly dynamic. It changes all the time. And the one thing that machine learning is really, really bad at is new stuff. What's happening is that information is becoming a necessary part of society, so it has to be commoditized and regulated. And that's going to be a major transition to get that to happen in a way that doesn't hurt the innovation and provides the best possible service for everybody. Well, the part that I really like about the book is it represents sort of state-of-the-art conversation here at MIT and elsewhere in the world. This is what you hear when you go to Davos, when you go to Jackson Hole, places like that, and talk with the big guys. Not just the big guys, but the smart big guys, right? And so it's really a snapshot of what's the best thinking in the world about the changes that we're undergoing, and what do you do about it? That's the other part, is that it's not just some sort of theoretical thing. People are worried about these issues. It also talks about what people can do and are doing about it. And so that I think as a business book, it's just absolutely dead on.
So the robots aren't coming for our jobs?
No, not all of them. And in particular, jobs that require higher level social skills, interpersonal skills like negotiation, persuasion, coordination, motivation. The evidence is really clear. The robots are lousy at that. Those are highly valued skills. Those are great ones for people to work on.
So I want to segue now into the next theme of your book, and that is platforms. How companies are handling the integration between products and platforms, which you define as online environments that take advantage of the economics of free, perfect, and instant. Well, so let's back up. Why those attributes?
Well, more and more of the world's information is becoming digitized. More and more of the world's processes and products are becoming digitized. And digital information has exactly those three characteristics. You can make a copy of it for virtually zero. Each copy is exactly, precisely identical, indistinguishable from the original, and each copy can be transmitted anywhere on the planet, basically instantaneously. Free, perfect, and instant are standard for digital goods, but they're not something we saw with ordinary goods and services, things made of atoms or labor. But they have very different kinds of economics. They tend to lead to winner-take-all or winner-take-most economics. They also are a powerful enabler of these platforms that are coming to dominate the world. 5 out of the 5 most valuable companies on the planet today are platform companies.
So these are the platform companies that we think about: Uber, LinkedIn, Facebook, iTunes. But there are so many other platform companies. One that you talk about in the book is ClassPass. Break that down for us a little. Tell us about that business model.
Yeah, ClassPass was one of the favorite companies that we came across when we were writing this book, in part because it's got an MIT founder, and in part because I would have thought of group exercise as one of the least likely industries to be transformed by digital technologies at all. My naive view would have been, look, you get into a room, you go to a spin class, you go to Pilates, you do yoga, you kickbox. You can do that with a robot. I don't see the disruption from digital here. Luckily, a very smart entrepreneur did, and what she realized, and ClassPass is built around this, is that those group exercise classes usually have some empty spaces in them. It's kind of hard to get them exactly filled up with your own members. And what we can do with digital platforms, and with the fact that we all carry around very powerful devices these days, is allocate those empty spaces, the spaces that would have gone empty, give those to ClassPass members. And so what you actually have from the studio owner side is a way to fill up those empty spaces and make some additional revenue. Awesome. And from the user side, you've got a virtual gym membership where you can do spinning, yoga, Pilates, kickboxing. You can do them very flexibly, don't have to commit in advance, and you don't have to marry yourself to one kind of group exercise. That's a great idea.
So it did a lot of things right, but it also had some bumps along the way. Could tell us a little bit about the obstacles and challenges that it faced?
Yeah, one of the reasons ClassPass we found so interesting is it's this intersection of the economics of free, perfect, and instant, which Erik talked about, with the good old-fashioned economics of running a real-world business where space in your exercise studio is not free. You cannot scale it up instantly, and once you run out of space, it ain't perfect anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. And one of the original ClassPass offerings was essentially an unlimited membership. So take as many classes as you want. The problem was they paid the gym owner for every class their members took. They were charging a flat rate to the members. So there was a very big difference between their revenue model and their payments model. That doesn't matter in a free, perfect, and instant only world. Spotify can pay people or have an unlimited subscription very, very easily. That doesn't work as well when you're dealing in the world of atoms. So we found this collision between the world of bits and the world of atoms really interesting, helped us focus the thinking and the writing around platforms.
So ClassPass had to figure out a way to fix that for itself.
Well, and in ClassPass's case, they had to cancel the unlimited offering. And one of the things that we also found interesting was some other real-world platforms like Rent the Runway and like Postmates worked really hard and found clever ways to offer something that looked unlimited to their members while still finding a revenue model that worked for the company.
And so tell us a little bit more about what ClassPass had to do to figure out the revenue model, the right balance there.
Well, one of the things they did was experiment a bit. And so they let their customers try different setups. And when they found that some of them worked well, they were able to scale those up. And that's part of this strategy of experimenting and testing.
Well, that's exactly right. One of the things that we saw was that when ClassPass Unlimited ended, there was this big hue and cry in the press about, oh, is this company finished? Were they really short-sighted? No, like Erik says, it's an experiment. We forget that Netflix did something similar when they tried to offer pricing for their physical DVD and online, and people were up in arms, and it was this big black eye for the company. Netflix got past it. They're doing very, very well now. So we tend to think of one experiment that didn't work out as some kind of death knell for a company. One of our main points in writing the book, that's the wrong way to think about it.
So experiments is a theme that runs throughout your book, and this is actually a good segue to our third theme, and this is the crowd. GE, a very famous, the bluest of blue chip companies, took a big experiment in its quest for a fancy in-home ice maker by harnessing the wisdom of the crowd. Tell our viewers more about that.
So GE was one of the original companies on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's the only one that's still there. By any measure, GE is one of the great successes of the industrial era, still going strong. The other thing to keep in mind, GE is not a poor company. GE can afford a big R&D budget. They can afford a very, very big marketing budget. So when we came across this example of GE working with this external crowd of people to develop a new consumer product, and then instead of putting it out there and stuffing the channel with it, they asked people online to pre-commit to buy this thing before it was available and commit money in advance. That's something three-person hardware startups do. This doesn't feel like something industrial era giants do. So it was really interesting for us as an example of how the core, like GE is the core of the industrial era, is reaching out to this online crowd, and in this case, to design and test the market for a new style of ice maker.
So, I mean, as you said, GE is doing fine. Why do it this way? Why not just hand it over to the...
So it wasn't that they needed the money. It was that they needed the knowledge. And the best way to figure out if people really like a product, you can ask them, hey, would you like that? But if you have them put their money where their mouth is, then you really get an honest signal of whether or not they're going to buy it. So this was the most efficient way for them to basically do market research. And it's part of the fast-fail strategy. You'd rather test these things out this way rather than go all in, go with a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign, and then find out later that it doesn't work.
It's a very fast, very relatively low-cost way to get a signal about what the market is actually going to value out there. And I think we talk about this as crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. Those, if anything, are a little bit dismissive as terms. These are pretty big changes in the way that we sense and we try to assess demand for the stuff that we're doing.
Well, the MIT Sloan Experts Series recently sat down with Beth Comstock, who is Vice Chair at GE, Director of Business Innovations. Here's what she had to say about the Nugget ice maker.
So First Build was this idea where with GE Appliances, we knew we needed some new ideas. We knew we didn't have them all within GE. We had been playing around with open source. We'd done some challenges. Now the team was convinced it could make them engineer products better and that they could do a microfactory to test products faster and use the community to sell things so that rather than ramping up for a very expensive line change, they could do it in a small microfactory, sell it to a limited community, and see if there's appetite, and then scale big. So that's what happened, and the Nugget Ice was a holy grail. Creating great ice, believe it or not, is not that easy. And so by creating this online engineering community and physical, using the local community of Louisville, they were able to bring together amazing engineers who helped them figure out how do they create crunchable, fresh ice. They were able to manufacture it and then sell it, and in partnership with companies like Indiegogo, create a community that was able to sort of follow along the progress and be not only part of making it, but also part of buying it. And the reality is you're trying to make them work better together. So a couple of things we found out. We talk about it as tapping the global brain. And it's this idea that, the world is becoming smarter with the connectivity and the intelligence, and you now can find brain power that you never could before. So you need the connectivity, and you need the people willing to take a chance. I also love the fact that it's somewhat blind in the sense you don't know really where the people come from, you don't know their education, you don't know their ethnicity, their gender. So in some ways, it really is a meritocratic process. And so I think it's the ability to sort of say, what are we good at? That's what GE had to have a moment of reflection. What are we good at? What's proprietary and we have to protect? And then what are the things that we're never going to get good at? Or it's just not in our sweet spot, and that's where we want to go and use the global brain to help make us better. What great tech companies often want to do is you want to make it perfect, and then you want to launch it. And in the digital age, it's around how do you get more buy-in, how do you get more usability, how do you build a community, and do that together. And that's a bit of a mindset shift. The future of work for us is this vision of man and machine together. I think this idea that machines are going to take over all of our work is really overblown. We believe that, but we're also seeing the ability to make your jobs better. One of the things we did recently was we've run a series of tests on manufacturing floors and service areas, and we've been able to do videos where you show people doing service the old way, where they had a printed service manual, and then we put them with augmented reality glasses with the service manual just fed to them. 30 to 40% improvement in productivity, fewer errors. And when the service teams themselves see that, they self-select. They're like, I want to be more efficient. I want to be a better version of what I can do. So I think partly it's just getting everybody, it's not just the skills, it's the familiarity, and I'd say that's the phase we're in right now. We know that Erik and Andy have just invested so much time in understanding it. They see the patterns. And so I think hopefully they'll hold our hands and take us now to the next chapter.
So now we're going to harness some wisdom and excitement from the crowd here and answer some questions that have been coming in on the MIT Sloan Experts Series Twitter feed. Okay, so the first one is, how does this technological shift change what and how you teach at MIT Sloan? That's a good one.
It's had a huge impact. We launched a course called the Analytics Lab, where students work on projects. Companies give them data sets, and teams of 3 or 4 students work all semester long, and then they present them at the end of the semester. And even just since we started teaching it, I see the methods evolve from sort of more random forest and towards more advanced techniques. And it's been quite impressive how almost every team is able to do better than the company's own experts had done on those same kind of problems.
Okay, next question. What is your best advice for a newly minted MBA embarking on a career?
Work hard.
Okay.
Stress both halves of your brain, so get your quant skills where they need to be, but don't ignore the actual social skills of negotiation, management, persuasion, things like that. Other thing I would say, I was always taught as a teacher to have my students increase confidence in their own judgment. No. Have your judgment, test your judgment. Don't just think that you're awesome.
I really want to underscore what Andy said in that we're at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and tech skills are very, very highly rewarded, but machines are really not very good at some of the social skills either, and there's a big opportunity there for us to sharpen our teamwork, our motivation, and all the EQ, emotional intelligence, not just the IQ.
Collaborative skills.
Absolutely.
This is one of the things that we're doing more and more at the Sloan School. I think every major school is.
But Carl Bass is one of the guys that we've learned a lot from. He used to run Autodesk, and he said to us, you know what I never notice when I walk around the hallways of my company? People doing problem sets on their own.
Yeah,
It's just not how work actually gets done.
It's a good point, a good point. Machine learning and data analytics is happening in company silos. Will companies collaborate together in future for greater results? So that's a good question.
Oh, they already are. I was just out at OpenAI in San Francisco, and it's a group of a whole bunch of companies that are working together. And one of the things that I learned from Jan LeCun, who's head of AI at Facebook, is that the companies that do the best are the ones that push and encourage, allow their researchers to publish, because that keeps you on the cutting edge. Academia has come up with a pretty good system for advancing knowledge, and the smart companies are mimicking that, or even tapping into it.
We have time for one more question. Which of these big ideas holds the most promise for solving social problems?
I would say the crowd, because as enthusiastic and as impressed as I am by machine learning, which is astonishing, the ability to tap into the actual billions of brains out there on the world for the first time in human history and get these under-recognized geniuses to work on our tough problems, I think it's impossible to overestimate that.
I would add to that that really all three of these come together. That even though we describe them in each of these three sections, a lot of successful companies, platforms, products, they combine them in different ways. They use a platform to reach to the crowd, and then they use that to improve their machine algorithms. So you don't have to make a sharp distinction.
Right.
It's not either or.
Erik and Andy, thanks so much. This has been an enlightening and also very fun conversation. Thank you so much.
It's been delightful.
The book is out
Rebecca,
tomorrow. The book is out tomorrow. Machine Platform Crowd. Thank you so much for joining us on the latest installment of the MIT Sloan Experts Series. We hope to see you again soon.